Vietnamese President Jun Dong-sung met with U.S. President Barack Obama at the White House. It is only the second time a Vietnamese president has visited Washington since the two countries normalized relations nearly 20 years ago. Now, Vietnam and the United States are strengthening trade ties. White House correspondent Jessica Stone reports.
Vietnamese President Jun Dong-sang and U.S. President Barack Obama said Thursday they are committed to completing talks for a regional free trade pact by the end of this year. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP.
Both the United States and Vietnam are participating in what will be an extraordinarily ambitious effort to increase trade.
Wednesday night, President Tsang spoke to hundreds of American business leaders, including Nike and Coca-Cola, asking for more investment and hailing the promise of the TPP for regional economic growth.
We welcome and look to the expressing of possibility and connection of all this towards a dynamic and free trade area for the entire Asia-Pacific region.
With an economy generating just $142 billion a year, Vietnam has much to gain from the partnership, but territorial disputes in the South China Sea are a threat to regional and global commerce. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, nearly a third of global crude oil and over half of the world's liquefied natural gas passes through the South China Sea each year. Last month, Hanoi and Beijing created a hotline to help resolve such disputes. Thursday, President Tsang sought reassurance from the United States for the peaceful resolution of conflicts in the South China Sea.
We very much appreciate Vietnam's commitment to working with ASEAN and the East Asia Summit in order for us to arrive at codes of conduct that will help to resolve these issues peacefully and fairly.
Outside the White House on Thursday, hundreds of activists from both Canada and the U.S. protested Vietnam's treatment of government critics and bloggers, asking President Obama to put human rights ahead of trade. Obama said he pressed President Tsang on human rights. The Vietnamese president said the two nations have opposing views.
We still have differences on the issue.
In the past, President Obama has been much tougher on the Vietnamese government and its treatment of its critics, even naming a Vietnamese dissident in a statement last year. But this year, the administration has been much more cautious, signaling that through economic reforms in Vietnam, political reforms will come. Jessica Stone, CCTV, Washington.
For more on U.S.-Vietnam relations, we are joined by Adrian Stover, economist with Cascade Asia. Welcome to BIZ Asia America. And thank you. Vietnam, a country with, almost 100 million citizens, is certainly on the radar, but it's not a big talking point when it comes to U.S. trade. The president here in Washington having the meetings, you've been involved in some of these meetings. Tell us how it's going.
Well, I think it's going very well. I think for a long time, Vietnam has been seen as a rising middle country. The U.S. is very interested in, both for exports and for strategic reasons as well. And I think I speak for the entire foreign policy community when I say that this relationship will only increase over time.
You've been covering this relationship, and it's been let's be honest, it's been an awkward relationship. Both countries have very different political sets of agendas. Both countries have very different cultures. Tell us about what you've learned, for the past 20 years as you look at this history and the amazing change and transformation it's gone through.
Well, it's been very interesting to look at it. It's the United States and Vietnam have had a complicated relationship over the past 30 or 40 years, but I think we've seen a lot of improvements in the last 10 or 15 years with the bilateral trade agreement signed in 2001. Vietnam joined the WTO in 2007. And I think there's, just talking to people on the street, there's a very wide positive perception of Americans. And obviously things are very different from they were 30 years ago, but now Intel is there, Coca-Cola is there. It's very different.
One of the most famous business stories was, I won't name the shoe manufacturer, but of course they had factories in Vietnam. This was many, many years ago. And this was sort of the beginning of multinational firms going into Vietnam. This is even before when China became as big of a deal as it is today. Where is the status of that relationship between multinational firms in Vietnam today?
Well, I think it's growing, and I think it is going to continue to grow for a long time. I think especially with the garment industry going through changes right now, the market's going through a flux, especially looking at kind of what's going on in Bangladesh now. I think a lot more of that activity is going to shift more towards the ASEAN region, especially Vietnam.
Now, I don't want to be remiss because there are some serious differences between the two countries still, and I'm speaking about the travel restrictions. Tell us about the current status of that and how it might be improved.
Well, I think right now there's definitely some there's tourist restrictions. You can't go some places, as well as visa restrictions. But I think
both ways, right?
Both ways. I think, and I think the more that both countries work together, they can kind of ease those ease into those relationships.
Would that be a next natural step for them to talk to in terms of negotiations? Perhaps they may have talked about it, but that seems to be a very typical thing the United States does when we enter in these discussions. Is the first thing is just to get basic travel back and forth and make it a little bit easier.
No, it is. I mean, it's easier now. Just even if you wanted to hop on a plane now, you could sign up to have a visa on arrival, and it's really pretty much no problems. But I mean, obviously, it used to be that way in Bangkok, and now it isn't. And so I think as Vietnam and the United States continue to trade with each other, they'll see that relationship growing, and possibly will ease out tourist restrictions as well.
I want to bring the discussion out outside of just U.S. and Vietnam, but also talk about China a little bit, the rest of Asia, because Vietnam is now a sort of a mini manufacturing hub for also businesses in China, businesses in Europe and the U.S. What else can they do to make sure that they're on the radar when companies are looking to expand, that they'll consider looking at Vietnam?
Well, I think the China plus one strategy for a lot of American businesses is still in effect. I think a lot of American businesses are still attracted to Vietnam just by the low cost of labor, especially with rising prices, rising wage prices in China. And so I think for right now, they will still be continued to be attracted to Vietnam as a market, just for either textile manufacturers or even kind of moving into the more high-end manufacturing as well.
There are some critics out there that say, you know, for example, one of Vietnam's largest exports has to do with seafood. And a lot of seafood producers are very scared. If Vietnam's able to just export all the seafood to the United States for a lot less than what they can mine for here, then that's a concern to some of the farmers. And there's pockets of this around the country, not just in the U.S., but outside. What do you say to those people? Why is this good for the world?
Well, I think trade in general, I mean, is good for the world. I think a lot of economists have looked at trade patterns and seen that the more trade there is, the more GDP growth there is. But I think, I mean, it touches on a broader issue of rules of origin for certain things and making sure the products that are coming from Vietnam that entered the U.S. market aren't sold at below market prices.
All right. Well, certainly this is a story we continue to follow. As we understand it, the president of Vietnam is headed his way towards New York City, probably for more deals.
Indeed.
Adrian Stover, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.